are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to our webinar. This is Sarah Lavoie with Mach 7 Technologies. And as you know, everyone's in listen-only mode, but we would like to hear from you. We would like to have this as interactive as possible, and we want to hear your questions. So as we move forward with the presentation, if you've got questions, please enter them into the chat window or the question window located at the bottom of the control panel, which is to the right of your screen. If it's not showing, there's a little red arrow kind of makes it extend out or go in, and you can use that to access the control panel. So please enter your questions there, and we will address the questions at the end of the session. We are recording this session, and we will share the recording with you via an email link. And at the end of the session, we are also we'll send you a copy of the ebook written by Ascending Consulting and Logicalis, which gives more information about this topic. At this point now, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Rice, CTO of Mach 7 Technologies. Eric?
Very good. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you for all of you that have logged in or listening today. So, Sarah, if we could press 1.
Yep.
So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce the speakers today on this webinar. So one, Trent Conwell has joined us from Sentara Healthcare. Sentara Healthcare is a large health system in the East Coast of the United States with a number of different facilities, as well as systems and vendor solutions and so forth. Also, too, I'd like to introduce Jeff Williams. Jeff is the former COO of Ascending Healthcare Consulting and now consulting independently. And as we go through the discussions today, Jeff and Trent will be providing great value on the various topics. So first and foremost, the topic today, we are talking about the 6 key elements of an enterprise imaging strategy. Much of this content, as Sarah highlighted before, is really inspired by an ebook that was published by Ascending Healthcare Consulting and Logicalis Healthcare Solutions, of which Jeff was one of the, today on the call, was one of the authors. And for all of you, again, as Sarah highlighted, for all of you that are on the webinar today, you will receive a link to the ebook that goes into much more detail around these 6 key elements of enterprise imaging strategy. As we go into this, we will talk about, of those 6 elements, we'll talk about governance, and really governance is really talking about how setting that governance can really help to drive success into the strategy. 2, we'll talk about storage, not just the physical aspects of storage, but also, too, when we talk about the different departments, types of data, and formats that are stored on storage, and some key questions and elements that you'll want to think about as you talk about storage in your strategy. Also, acquisition and workflow. As much as it is important for the front-end workflows for technologists and radiologists, cardiologists, and so forth, it's also really important to talk about that workflow behind the scenes and how the data is localized and normalized and where data is sent and aspects of that. Access and visualization, certainly, number one, how do we image enable our EMRs, but also, too, how do we engage with the patients further? How do we get access to referring physicians and even the specialists? Image exchange and portability. I think I've yet to meet a health system that does not have challenges with dealing with CDs and DVDs. So we'll talk about that a bit, and we'll wrap it up around data analytics. And with data analytics, how can we use the data, the imaging data, to better add value back into our organization? So to kick things off, we'll jump into governance here. So first and foremost, certainly, setting up governance is really important to the strategy and roadmap and driving success into your enterprise imaging strategy. And my first question goes to you, Jeff. What are some of the key aspects that health systems should be looking at when talking about their strategy around governance?
Thanks, Eric. I think that when we talk about enterprise imaging, I think the definition of it is really critical. And when I address enterprise imaging, when I'm talking about it with my clients, it's much more than just implementing a VNA. It's really the entire scope of adopting an approach to how we're going to manage imaging across the enterprise, not just in radiology and cardiology, but across all the other specialties and subspecialties. And because it's such a heavy lift, even though it may be an iterative model of adoption, it requires a lot of engagement from a lot of different people. So governance, I think, and I believe, and it's found to be true, is absolutely critical to the success of the initiative. When I mean governance, it's not just a steering committee, because there's a lot of tough questions that have to be answered, and there's a lot of tough challenges that have to be navigated politically. So the governance has to understand that they're going to have to address some of the challenges associated with strategy, momentum, decision-making, adoption, the chronology of events across the enterprise, and it's going to be politically charged. So it's got to be a structure that is empowered by the highest leadership within the organization, and have the authority to make some of the tough decisions that need to be made. In addition, I think that, and I believe that where we're seeing a lot of success are places where that governance model includes a broad representation across the enterprise. It's not just radiology and cardiology, but it's inviting other specialties to the table to participate, and it's cross-disciplinary. So it's not just cross-disciplinary clinically, but it's representing key leadership within IT and key leadership within the operations.
Great, good. Actually, Jeff, when I think about governance and this broad team, I'm sure there's lots of different opinions, around the strategies and so forth. I'm sure there can be some tough debates when stakeholders are requesting systems and equipment and so forth. How do you deal with that? What about the rules of engagement?
I like that term, rules of engagement, because that's something that we've used a number of times. And you have to have up front. You have to set up a set of decision criteria. I think doing that early in the process is important, because you don't have to make one-off decisions along the way. And some of those decisions include how we're going to roll out our enterprise imaging strategy. In a lot of organizations, it's a technical component, and it's an operational component, and ultimately clinical component. Oftentimes, it begins with the technical. Implementing the platform that allows us to have the ability to ingest images from all kinds of different areas, all kinds of different specialties, et cetera. Sometimes it starts in radiology. I've seen some organizations where actually cardiology is where the enterprise imaging initiative begins, because it's fun to do a cardiology implementation. So you have a chronology issue you have to solve early on, and you have to decide what is the way we're going to roll this out, and what is the model we're going to use. So making that decision early on, I think, is critical, because there's a lot of specialties who think that they add a lot of value, and they make a great argument that they're a huge revenue stream into the organization, and so they will lobby to be earlier in the process, but it may not make sense. So you have to make that decision early on. Secondly, you've got to make some important decisions around the kind of data that you're going to include, and what the minimum amount of metadata surrounding or attached to that image is required for it to be ingested as part of the patient record. You may end up having to make some decisions about, having areas of, within the organization that the clinical systems are not, data is not clean enough, quote unquote, to include, and it will be too challenging or costly, or it has to be postponed to a later date to include into the process. And you have to fight some uphill battles there. But if you have that decision criteria up front, I think you're in a much better position to communicate well, to be transparent across the organization, and to build the trust that's required to be successful in your deployment.
Very good. Thanks, Jeff. I wonder, Trent, from a Sentara perspective, if there's any comments you'd have on some of what Jeff has highlighted, lessons learned that maybe could help others, but also, too, if you could speak to governance and how it can really help with the momentum of a project.
Well, I think I would just stay on the same line as what Jeff was on. And I apologize, am I echoing it?
Actually, not too much echo, although you did break up a little bit there.
Sorry about that. We meet at Sentara were critical behind the beginning of the project. Each organization can take those objectives and determine what the leverage points are. But the executive teams ultimately to a large degree. So in order to maintain momentum throughout the series of transitions, and it's critical that you stay true to this objective. Assuming that you've done just like Jeff has said and put minimum requirements against each one of the objectives, it stays fairly clear up the chain that what's required in order to meet those objectives and to stay on track. But certainly critical for those objectives to set your roadmap for the entire project.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Trent. And governance is certainly an important aspect to set up front and to get in place for really driving the success of your imaging strategies, through their projects, which may be multi-year. It's not just one project's going to be done in 3 months. So, all right. With that, how about we move on to the next topic around storage? Storage beyond just the physical aspects of storage. There's a lot of questions to ask, I believe, around storage. And first to you, Jeff. When we talk about storage for clinical systems, what do we need to know about?
Well, I think it's clear that we oftentimes, in many of my clients' ecosystems, there are systems that either they don't know exist or don't understand the architecture of how those systems are designed until they reach them at some point across their deployment. So one of the things that it's always built into every business case I've been a part of is trying to find an ROI. And one of the ways we look for an ROI is in our storage architecture and strategy. So not just ILM, but looking for ways to decouple the archiving component of various clinical systems and using a VNA to manage it more smartly. One of the things, though, that we discovered is that when you get outside of radiology and cardiology, it's the Wild West. And a lot of these specialty PACS systems, or imaging storage systems, you don't get to realize the value of pulling the data, the archiving data out of the system because they store the images in the database. And so where you thought you were going to achieve some level of return, you're just actually adding another copy into the enterprise. So it's actually costing you. You're not getting any return. So I say that to say that when you begin your enterprise imaging initiative, when you get your governance together, I think one of the things that's very important to do up front is to get a full assessment of all of the systems that are managing imaging data and getting in front of any ongoing procurement initiatives for systems to ensure that that there's a uniform strategy across the enterprise of how we're going to procure systems and the architectural requirements and design requirements of those systems to ensure that if we are looking for a return on our storage, we're actually able to achieve that.
All right, very good. Actually, building on that, Jeff, I'm going to stay with you for a second. From a health system perspective, and you touched on it maybe a little bit about inventorying the different systems that are out there. What do you really need to think about around the data integrity and structure and mappings and so forth like that around the data?
Well, this is where it gets really tricky because we have a lot of places where data resides, and historically we accessed it from one point within the workflow of a PACS, and so it didn't matter if we had multiple copies because everyone was looking at the images from the same point. Now we're looking at a disparate enterprise where there may be multiple integrations of the same image into a VNA or into an enterprise platform, whether it's in a PACS or it's in some sort of a post-processing system, a mammography or subspecialty system, or you've got it in a cache, to increase the performance of the viewer. So you start to run into challenges around data integrity, and we're supposed to have some IET profiles that manage that and deal with that, but most of the places where I'm working, we're finding that the IOCM rules and those sorts of things work occasionally, but not consistently. And the challenge is that you start to lose confidence in the data integrity. If the images are updated or they're sent to the wrong patient, are you sure that you're looking at the right image? And so, ensuring that you have a uniform approach and you have thought through how, the source of truth is going to be updating all other copies is absolutely critical.
Yeah, great. Good. Thanks, Jeff. Hey, Trent, I know for ourselves, when we installed our VNA at Sentara, we talked a lot about return on investment around storage. I wonder if you could highlight anything around your business case and how the VNA and the Mach 7 enterprise imaging platform really helped there.
Sure. I would start out by saying, same like with what Jeff just stated, that storage is one of the most critical decisions that you're going to make, not only in the vendor that you're going to procure your storage from, but the way in which you're going to implement that storage solution. But at the end of the day, it's something that needs to be completely transparent to your end users. But since by and large, at least at Sentara, we were graded on our Mach 7 implementation, based off of the response time that the clinicians were receiving. So the storage plays a big part of that, but it's really the implementation of the platform that really drives that ultimate response time. So when you get into some of the components like Jeff was mentioning around IOCM, it's the integration components around that storage that the Mach 7 platforms allowed us to realize the response time benefits. But specifically back, Eric, to your question, at Sentara, we built the majority of our initial business case off of the cost savings related to storage during the implementation, and it was quite profound and ultimately led to a very strong business case and a very positive ROI for us at Sentara. That was due to multiple factors, lifecycle management being the largest factor. Our ability to be very granular in the definition of the rules around ILM allowed us to transition into lifecycle management at our own pace, and cost savings realized over a period of time. So while it's certainly very critical to the success of your implementation, it's also something that we're needing to put a handle on as far as the design, the implementation of the design, and the integration of the design with your other PACS vendors, and whether they be radiology or other ologies with the organization.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much, Trent. Actually, with that, why don't we move on to talk about acquisition and workflow. One thing as I open, one thing I think that's important, workflow on the front end to the clinical users, the referring physicians, the radiologists, the cardiologists, the technologists, is really important, but there's also a lot of value that can be provided, even with the back-end workflow and how data is acquired and the workflow where it's transmitted to, and the workflow around archiving and how data is archived. So, with that first, up here on this slide, we talk about departmental versus enterprise solutions and how acquisition workflow may have effects there differently. Jeff, I wonder if you could touch on what do we need to know around acquisition and workflow with the departments and across the enterprise?
So I think that it's obviously important to understand that those are two equally yet different definitions and problem statements. The Enterprise Imaging Initiative has specific goals to the organization, to the business model, to access to information from the provider side, and the analytics and all that sort of thing that drives the business and drives the level of patient care. But it doesn't solve the departmental problem. And I think that I've seen a number of times where there's been a kind of an assumption that if we adopt an enterprise solution, we can get rid of our PACS. And there's a lot of talk, about the deconstructed PACS model and that sort of thing. And I think there's a lot of value in looking at a modularized approach to the departmental solution. But it's important to understand that a VNA is not going to replace your PACS. There's clearly a gap from an enterprise approach to solving the departmental challenges. We're having to do more with less all the time, and reimbursements are going down, and now we have these new policies coming out of the federal government and CMS around how there's going to reduce reimbursements and payments and that sort of thing. And so it's clear that we have to continue to find ways to optimize our workflow at the departmental level. I mean, that's where the patient throughput happens. So, there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, so to speak. I don't think there's a one size fits all in this area, but it's important to understand what we're trying to do, what the department needs to be able to do, and then what are we trying to do from an enterprise approach and tackle it from both ends. One of the things that I've seen in a number of different cases is that there's an assumption that we can roll out the radiology workflow and people will adopt it. You get outside of radiology and cardiology, no one's ever heard of an accession number. No one even thinks about placing an order before capturing an image. So we have to start to develop ways to manage that, and that's a strategic approach, and it's dependent upon a lot of different things within the organization and the assets you already have and leveraging those assets. But that is clearly a challenge, and you've got to get the right people at the table, representative of the various areas where you're looking to deploy your strategy, and understand that just supplying them with a VNA and a viewer isn't going to solve the departmental problem. And at the enterprise side, we're still going to have to figure out ways to manage those images that come in. They may have a minimal amount of information attached to them to ensure that they attach to the patient record.
Very good, Jeff. Thank you. I think from ourselves too at Mach 7, we definitely see a lot of differences between the departmental workflows and the enterprise workflows. And like for instance, when we're walking into a radiology department or even a non-DICOM department, talking about formats and how we're going to fix study descriptions and suffix accession numbers, or in the non-DICOM world that we're going to store it in their native format so the modality in that department can get the data back is really important. Whereas, when we're talking more at the enterprise IT or CIO level, it's ultimately they don't really care what it's stored at, what it's stored in, or what format it's in. They just want to make sure it's available and accessible in the EMR, and that referring physicians can get access to it and so forth. So, workflows, I agree with you. I think acquisition and workflow is much different at the department and enterprise level. Jeff, when you talk about a balance of workflow and data integrity, I think you touched on that a little bit. I wonder if you could elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah, well, one area that comes to mind is I think everyone has found a way to improve latency to the desktop or to the handheld device. are deploying a viewer with some sort of a cache that allows them to cache images and tune them up, at a great rate. But again, we run into challenges around image disparity and image object disparity. We have maybe an update to that image data, and what is the latency for that to get to the cache? That's a challenge I think that a lot of organizations are facing, and there's a lot of different ways viewers are architected in the industry, and some are looking for some require a cache, some don't. We're looking at a lot of new format with integration, with the web services and those sorts of things where we're reducing the requirement for cache. But still, you have to understand that every system you deploy has to conform with your data management model and ensure that the last thing you want to do is reduce the confidence of the clinician that they're looking at accurate information. So tearing the architecture apart early on and designing it in a way to ensure that images are kept in context and in sync is absolutely critical.
Yeah, very good. Hey, Trent, I wonder, I know we've done a lot of workflow, data workflow work at Sentara. I wonder if there's anything you could highlight or touch on from your experiences at Sentara.
Well, as Jeff was mentioning, workflow versus data integrity, it's a classic, catch-22. Does workflow drive data integrity, or does data integrity drive workflow? And obviously the answer is both. And it'll become very obvious within your project, within your implementations, that this is the eternal struggle on the success of the project. And so the value of the Mach 7 platform is that it helps bridge the gap between the two. If you take a simple use case, Jeff mentioned cardiology and accession numbers. That's a great example that when you get something in from cardiology, you may not have the quote-unquote pure default standard requirements of that data or that order. It may not be timely, different scenarios that you would expect from a technology perspective. But that doesn't mean that you can't implement a solution from cardiology. You've just got to be able to basically code the rules in the engine appropriately to allow for the, I'll just call them lack of information that you receive, or the lack of timeliness of information that you receive in that particular scenario. So, just like we did at Sentara, we allow for the platform to really make the determination if we have complete, accurate, and timely information, and if not, then we wait. And that wait could be, from a few seconds to a couple of minutes. And once we determine that we have all the information in the platform, then we go out and we reassociate with a particular study at the appropriate time. This allows us to maintain the data integrity on the back end in the archive while still maintaining the data integrity. So it's a kind of a win-win for everyone, and it's been the platform that's allowed us to do that. So having that kind of tool, or as I like to think of an integration engine, at our disposal, really opens up our thought processes and allows us to strategize to close that gap between workflow and data integrity.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Trent. That's good. So I wonder, Sarah, if we can move on to talk about access and visualization. And first to you, Jeff, when we talk about access and visualization, what do you mean by federation or migration? What are some of the benefits and challenges there?
Acquisition is, when I say acquisition, I'm meaning at a system level. So whether you are an organization that is acquiring facilities, whether they be hospitals or imaging centers or specialty clinics, or you just across your enterprise, you're acquiring systems into your enterprise platform. Historically, that is required a migration effort. Moving the data to get access to the data, and I think that will continue to be the primary way that we ingest that information. But with some of the tools that are now available to us, to be able to federate data, to say, you know what, we're not going to pay the money to migrate it for one reason or another. There's a lot of different reasons why you might not want to migrate the data. But we can still access it within a federated model. We can provide, in some ways, a more seamless access model through visualization tools to the data, or even in an analytics model, being able to access the data for analytics or parsing it in a number of different ways in secondary use. But there's some value in doing that, and keeping the data where it lives, not moving it right away, maybe kicking the can down the road a little bit, either for cost reasons or resource allocation reasons, or a number of different reasons. But we don't have to move the data to get access to it now. But the challenge then is it's a normalization of that data. So if it stays where it is, do we have a system in place or a way to ensure that we can access it, but is it easily accessed? Are we normalizing it in a way that we can get it attached to the patient record without having to do one-off searches and that kind of thing? So there's challenges to each cost and strategy, but it's good. I think it's valuable that we now have a number of different options available to us.
Yeah, good. So when we talk about, from an access and visualization perspective, federative or migration, certainly, touching on your points there, Jeff, I think there's a lot of great visualization solutions out there today that can look across federated archives and be able to pull it back. So if you don't necessarily have to finish your migration before you can really pull together a single view of a patient record across an entire enterprise with a number of disparate archives. But I also hear you too. It's important that, although that technology is there, the integrity of the data from each of the systems is something that needs to be considered. Trent, at Sentara, what has been your strategy around short-term and long-term goals around access and federated or migration or whatever it may be? Can you talk a little bit?
Yeah, the fact that you mentioned short-term versus long-term, I think that's very important to understand, is that first and foremost, when you talk about federation, many organizations want to make that decision holistically up front at the beginning of the project. But the reality of it is you spend a significant amount of your time in what we've always called the transition period, and that's the period of implementation, where you basically have data living in multiple places. Migration, which is, the point of moving studies from point A to point B, it takes some time. So you've got to employ a strategy that is going to give the clinical users in your organization the perception that you, in fact, went live and have been live since day one. So federation plays a huge part in that effort. There's going to be a significant amount of impatience within the organization. They spend a lot of money to move images from point A to point B. They don't want to wait for that. They want it to happen instantaneously. And most organizations will not understand that if they took a look just within their own walls from a storage perspective, that a very high percentage of the storage that they own inside the organization is attributed towards studies. And it's a huge volume. So federation is something that transitions through your project just like anything else. More than likely, you're going to start off with some level of a federated approach so that you can get the clinicians, for lack of a better term, kind of off your back as it relates to access of studies. So you're going to give them the perception that you've gone live with your entire strategy. Migration, on the other hand, that's again something that you may want to make that decision up front, but the reality of it is that things are going to change as you move through your implementations. Jeff mentioned earlier that VNAs are not necessarily going to replace PAC systems. And on one hand, while that can be true, the other piece to that is the fact that VNAs, or the Mach 7 platform, has allowed Sentara to become PACS vendor agnostic. The reason for that is because once we have the images migrated into the Mach 7 platform, now the PACS system truly is a departmental solution. And the replacement of that PACS system is now feasible, both in time, effort, and money. So an organization like Sentara that is very heavy in acquisitions is doing just that. As we acquire new facilities, rather than just bringing on that incumbent or that existing PACS system, we have now employed a new model that allows us to migrate all of the studies ahead of time into the VNA and then decide on what we want to implement as a PACS solution, whether that be an existing enterprise standard or even using something along the lines of Mach 7's Clinical Studio. So the flexibility is sometimes almost a little bit challenging to work with, but this goes back to what we said at the very beginning, and that is having a good, solid understanding of what your objectives are. And certainly one of our objectives that we had to address at a very granular level was how we were going to deal with mergers and acquisitions. But if you got that plan in place, as you start to move forward and design the strategy with the technologies that you have, the Mach 7 solution has given us the flexibility that we've needed to make all of our acquisitions a much more flexible and successful proposition than we would have otherwise had.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Thank you, Trent. All right, with that, how about we move on? Two more topics of the 6 key elements. So, talking on image exchange and portability. Again, as I said in the beginning, I don't think I've met a health system yet today that hasn't had challenges with specifically around image ingestion and dealing with CDs and DVDs. And one out of every 10 CD is actually standard, and the other 9 are non-standard, and maybe it's full of JPEGs and a PDF, whatever it may be. And at Mach 7, we try to work with our customers quite a bit on these challenges. Both from having great technology to ingest not only the standard but also the non-standard CDs and DVDs, but also having the workflow and the ability to segment off that outside imaging data so that it can be reconciled or cleansed or localized, before it's sent to any other solution. And be able to offer these kind of solutions not only on the ingestion side, but also from an access and sharing perspective, be able to offer outbound for sharing, in the cloud or on site, depending on what the local facilities policies and governance are. Actually, we have run across a number of customers where their governance, has not allowed them to have imaging data stored outside of their firewall. So, also be able to have the technology to work with customers like that. But Jeff, I do want to ask you, what have you seen around image ingestion and exchange platforms out there? What have you seen successes? What successes have you seen out in the industry?
Well, I think success is probably in some cases overstated. Image exchange is still very much driven at the patient level. There's yet to be a real business imperative or an impetus to share data. Where I live, we have 4 major hospitals all within walking distance of each other, and there's not a lot of image exchange that happens between at an enterprise level. And even though there's transients, open enrollment and people changing providers, networks, and all that kind of thing. So, there's models out there that are providing a service. I think everyone knows about Life Image, everyone knows about Nuance, and some of the other smaller players out there. I think that clearly the business model needs to change to drive that. We have HIVs, but most HIVs are not image enabled. So it's still very much driven at the patient level, but having the kind of architecture in place that allows you to automate it as much as possible. And I don't think DVDs and CDs are going to go away anytime soon. But I think that being ready for it when it does happen, and I do believe it is going to happen, that, we tried to get it pushed through in meaningful use, and it really kind of fell with a minimal amount of requirements for exchange. So, but it's going to happen, and the patients are going to require that. I think it's going to probably be driven from the patient side. Having the architecture in place that allows you to automate as much of normalizing the data and localizing it is absolutely critical, whether it's through your workflow engine or through the DNA or some component of your enterprise architecture that allows you to ingest the data and then know what to do with it. Having smart rules around, are we keeping this? Are we just storing it, for a short period? We're going to put some rules around the outside images. Do you want to manage it long term, et cetera? There's some policies that have to be developed, but having the technology in place, I think, is also critical to automate as much as possible.
Very good, Jeff. Thank you. All right, actually, let's move on to data analytics, the last topic here. From my perspective, or not really my perspective, I think it's pretty standard out in the industry, but there's really three forms of data analytics. There's descriptive analytics, which descriptive analytics is really looking at the data that you have and mining some kind of value out of it. So it's a lot of looking in the past and looking at historical data in your system. Predictive analytics, I think there's a lot of buzz at RSNA last year around predictive analytics and deep learning and looking at data as it's coming in and making predictions. And in our case, in medical imaging, can we predict or make suggestions to a specialist or pre-annotate images to highlight areas of interest or even a diagnosis suggestion? That's really around predictive analytics. And then prescriptive analytics, even bringing it to the next level, and really prescribing what procedures or healthcare maybe should be taken next based on results that are coming into a system. And certainly today we do a lot. Mach7 does a lot of on the descriptive side and starting to see more and more on the predictive side. Actually, we do have a global customer right now that's working with one of the deep learning analytics companies to do exactly as I described, the predictive analytics prior and pre-annotating images and things like that. But to you, Jeff, actually to kick off first with Jeff, as you're looking at the industry and seeing these different forms of analytics being performed, what should health systems or what are health systems looking for, and what questions should they be asking, and what should they be looking for?
Well, I think we're at the front edge of, I think, what's going to be a great period of discovery. I think that we'll find, healthcare has a mountain of information. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we adopted the data warehousing model. We just shoved everything into a data warehouse, and now we're realizing that we probably should have done a better job with our data modeling up front. But with that said, I think now that we are meeting in front of a lot of that this next few years, it's going to be an exciting time to see a lot of things discovered. And it really begins with the use cases for the primary use of the data, like you talked about, as well as use cases for the secondary use of the data, not just population health, but some other ways that we're going to be able to manage the information. One of the things that I was actually talking to someone recently, one of my clients, and they have historically, when they do clinical research around imaging, it's been the upfront effort required to gather the data because they have a particular model or profile that they're looking for. They have to go to a bunch of different places. They have to extract the information, normalize it, and then put it into a separate location to do all of their parsing. And when you start to look at the enterprise platform, they're excited about the opportunity to not have to do so much upfront labor-intensive work in gathering the information, extracting it, because it can partition a section off of the archive or create an instance within the enterprise platform that will speed that first phase, so they can really begin to do some of the clinical research that they want to do. So I think that's an exciting component of an enterprise strategy. But to your point, I think that having it's going to be an iterative approach over time. We've got all the normal reports. There's a lot of solutions out there now that are doing cool things like Montage and so forth, where we're able to really start to see some cool analytics and the informatics that come out of that information, the reports and so forth. But there's also a creative component to that too, and that is that we need to have people that are asking some interesting questions. And we in healthcare, we're not used to having data scientists. We're not used to having people who have the freedom to ask questions that no one's asked before, and to be able to script the kind of queries that are going to allow them to parse the data. But having the information in a location or on a platform that allows you to see everything allows you to look at information in ways we haven't had the opportunity to before.
Very good. Actually, last question maybe to you, Trent. From a Sentara perspective, is there anything you can share around Sentara and analytics, and how today or in the future you see maybe they would provide value back to Sentara?
Well, I think we, like many organizations, are really starting to understand and look into the predictive analytics and understand exactly what the benefits might be. There's still a lot of maturing going on in that space, but we're certainly looking at what IBM's doing, for instance. But to prepare for that, and Jeff really hit the nail on the head when he stated that it's going to be very important that you have all of your studies in a place that is easily integratable, both inbound and outbound. And by and large, your individual PACS vendors don't necessarily allow for that seamless type of integration. And so getting them into the Mach 7 platform, we think is really the foundation of setting ourselves up so that when we get to the point where predictive analytics becomes a bit more of a reality for us at Sentara, that we'll have the technology component of that by and large taken care of, and that it'll really become a clinical project or a clinical solution at that point, which is really where you want it. You don't want the technology getting in the way. So our stance right now is to ensure that we're in a place that the technology is sound, and using the Mach 7 platform, we believe is what's going to put us in a position to really move forward with the predictive analytics side as it becomes clearer down the road.
All right, very good. All right, with that, first and foremost, we're going to move on to some questions, but thank you, Jeff and Trent, to this point and going through those 6 key elements. But at this time, I think we'll take a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, Sarah.
Want me to read it?
You want to take a question?
Got a couple questions, and just a reminder, if you have any questions, please enter them into the question part of your console, which is on the right, and we will answer them. But the first one that I have is how important is object-based storage at the archive layer? What type of benefits are there for the metadata are you seeing, if any?
Yeah, actually, I think that goes along with data analytics quite a bit. I definitely, in my opinion, I definitely see object-based storage and playing a bigger and larger role as we move further into in the industry further adopts and progresses around analytics. I think that's certainly a technology that should be watched, and it's good for your platform to be able to leverage. I don't know, Jeff or Trent, if you have anything to add around object-based storage and its value.
Well, I think the value is being defined, through some of the different efforts that are going on out in the industry right now. And so again, being in a situation that you have the technology that can support, where the technology is changing is going to be incredibly important as you move along. For us at Sentara, it's again being agnostic. We don't want to be tied down by technology. and getting on to a platform such as Mach 7 has allowed us that versatility and that flexibility. So as technology do evolve and change, and we start to get a clearer picture of where we need to go, we can be agile and nimble and move in the right direction.
Good. Thanks, Trent.
And one more question here. Have you managed to implement cashless viewing systems to mitigate challenges of keeping multiple copies in sync?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. Actually, yeah, Mach 7, we certainly have different viewing solutions that do integrate to our backend archive in a cashless way, and therefore, those viewers don't need their own archive, their own cache. And that certainly simplifies keeping multiple copies. And I think Jeff touched on this a little bit earlier, but when you have multiple systems with multiple caches or archives, the next thing you need to answer is how do you keep them all in sync? And I think the latest standard out there is IOCM, Image Object Change Management. We support it both inbound and outbound, but it is a newer standard. A lot of PAC systems, a lot of viewers don't support that yet. So I think there is an opportunity to you can almost leapfrog all those challenges of trying to get your PACS vendor to IOCM support and then really just go with a cashless viewer.
Great.
But actually, I don't know if Jeff or Trent, if you have anything to add, feel free.
Well, that's been a huge topic of conversation and design at Sentara because IOCM, as you stated, hasn't necessarily been adopted across the major PACS vendors. So we've used a bit of a hybrid approach depending on which PACS vendor that we're looking at. But ideally, we like to see IOCM in place, and that provides us the ability to go cashless should we choose to do so. So it's certainly a standard that we'd like to see adoption across the board. It just provides us with the flexibility that we'd like to have for our implementations and integrations.
Yeah, very good. Actually, I would highlight too, even for some systems, and again, I would definitely promote cashless integrations, but even for some systems that don't support IOCM, we have, there are workflows that can be implemented to keep systems in sync. Some PAC systems have proprietary interfaces, but beyond that, even, for instance, some of our customers will interrogate the PACs, at certain trigger points through the life cycle of a study to make sure that both systems are staying in sync. And that's, the absence of IOCM or some proprietary interface.
So follow-up question to that. Can you propagate IOCMs to many systems if you have multiple viewers consuming the object?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so IOCMs, at least with our platform and technology, we can send IOCMs to multiple target systems or receive them from multiple source systems. So.
Okay, great.
Yep.
All right, I think that might be the last question.
All right, very good. Well, again, Jeff and Trent, thank you very much. I think this is very informative, and for all of you that I do understand there were some technical audio challenges in the beginning. We apologize for that, and I think we changed technology mid-flight. But thank you all for attending. Please do, if you're at SIM this year, please do stop by Mach 7 at booth number 407. And thank you again, everybody.
Great. And once again, we'll be following this up with an email giving you access to the ebook and the recorded version of this webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.